Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the invitation to speak today. So I guess you can tell by my accent, Sarah didn't need to introduce that I was from Ireland. And I've popped up here. For those of you who've been to Dublin, I'm sure you've walked across this bridge. This is the Halfpenny Bridge, so called because one had to pay half a penny to cross it in the old days. So I guess in a way it is a symbol of equality, because everyone can walk across it now, regardless of how much money they have in their pockets. So I guess our work, as Sarah says, encompasses lots of different areas of EDI, but I think today I'll just talk about gender equality, and I feel in a bad spot now because everyone else has spoken about how comprehensive their work is, and I've just picked a little bit of our work to talk about. But I suppose Ireland's approach to gender equality has been described as and not by me, just to get that out of the way, but it's been described as the most comprehensive national policy approach to gender equality in Europe. And I mean, that's kind of accidental. We're just lucky that at a time we had a Minister for Higher Education who was interested in this area and gave us the mandate to develop a national policy and roll it out. And this all stems from two, I suppose, national policy documents which contain a number of recommendations for institutions. And the first of which is this one here on the screen, the 2016 National Review of Gender Equality in Irish Higher Education Institutions. And this review, which I guess now is 6 years old, was an important first step for us. It was really we've recently launched the second review, and we had the first meeting of the expert group last week. And basically someone said at the meeting that before 2016, gender inequality didn't exist in Ireland because no one ever had talked about it before. So I think we've come a long way in those 6 years. Back in 2015, when the review was started, we had 19% of the professors in our university system were female, and the document itself made a lot of recommendations to higher education institutions, to the HEA ourselves, and to research funding agencies and other relevant stakeholders nationally. However, by the end of 2017, as it says here, progress was quite slow, or at least politically it was deemed to be slow, and we ended up with a second policy document within 2 years, which from my perspective is great, because now we have about 65 national recommendations which I have to implement and monitor. So any of you who are working on a national level, less recommendations better would be the message there. You can see here some of the major recommendations, and I guess these crossed both documents and really, I suppose, equate to Gender Equality 101. And a lot of the times, I really liked what Tom said earlier on about the difference between aspirations and targets, and a lot of these documents have aspirations in them rather than targets, which is quite difficult to implement. So we have gender action plans, funding mechanisms to advance progress, My Job, which is the Centre of Excellence for Gender Equality, which is now morphed into the Centre of Excellence for EDI, as Sarah mentioned in the introduction, the adoption of Athena Swan in Ireland, and then other things such as gender proofing of recruitment and promotion practices, and also a direct call and direct funding for positive action initiatives, and I'll talk about one of them in a minute. So I suppose as a result of the 2016 review and the 2018 action plan, where are we now? And this is where we are. All publicly funded higher education institutions have gender action plans. Now, I guess this is one of the other reasons why we have the most comprehensive policy. We are quite a small country. So in that context, at the moment, we have 18 publicly funded higher education institutions. That's down from 24 in recent years due to some mergers. So it's a nice size of a system to implement these types of policies in. Our institutions have appointed VPs for equality, diversity, inclusion, or the equivalent. Many of the institutions have these people sitting on the university management team, which is really a game changer in terms of getting that voice at the top table. We've seen an increase in gender balance in all the senior decision-making structures in the institutions, and I suppose in the context of the number of institutions, we now have 98 Athena Swan Awards, institutional and departmental, which is quite a jump, because we only really, I guess, Athena Swan came in 2015, 2016, but really it's only in the last 2 to 3 years that institutions and departments have upped their game. However, just go back to the old, the classic statistic, number of female professors. So this is a graph which was produced in 2017, which unfortunately told us we're going to have to wait 20 years to have at least gender equality in the professoriate within universities. Not good. So we needed to do something to change the lines. As you can see here, here's the scissors from 2016, 19 to 81. Again, not good. However, the current situation, so I'm jumping ahead here and showing the progress that we've made, and then I'll talk about 3 different approaches we've taken to try and affect that change. But you can see here, at the moment we're up to 20, so it's actually, I think it's 27.7%, so I could have gone to 28 there to make it look better, but that's where we are. So we've had a significant jump in the past 6 years. Again, we're not sure what will happen. Looking at figures across the EU, 30% seems to be a bit of a plateau, even in the Nordic countries. It kind of flatlines, so we're waiting to see how our comprehensive national approach to gender equality actually has impact. But so I guess the crux of all this is that even though that jump looks big, the statistical change is still slow. As Pavel, I think, in his presentation noted, cultural change is slow and it's hard to measure. So that led us to this need to actually fund diversity interventions. And I suppose the 3 types of intervention I'll talk about are positive action interventions in the form of the Senior Academic Leadership Initiative, seed funding for gender equality work, which we do annually in this Gender Equality Enhancement Fund, and then finally what I've termed indirect funding with incentivisation, which could also be called a carrot and a stick, but in the form of Athena Swan Ireland. So the first one is the Senior Academic Leadership Initiative. Unfortunately named because, as you can see from the acronym is SALI. Well, I guess depends on your perspective, but when they came up with the acronym, I don't think they thought that it was going to be a woman's name. But anyway, the SALI is a positive action initiative which attempts to put 45 what we call gender-targeted posts into the system. So legally, we weren't allowed to call them female professorships. So it was quite a complex system how we developed it. But we got approval. We had to go to the Attorney General's office to get approval for the scheme. So it was quite a difficult one to develop. But how we've used this, so it has a purpose of putting senior women into leadership positions in our institutions. It has that impact of role models, of raising awareness. Just by the virtue of its existence, it raised a lot of awareness in the national press and in the letters pages to the newspapers. But it also is helping us to address issues in subject areas where we see a real dearth of senior female academics. And I guess what we did with it beyond that was we rigged the application process to ensure that institutions had to be achieving on gender equality to be awarded funding for one of these posts. So you can see here the areas, how we framed the criteria was that the institutions needed to show clear evidence of significant gender underrepresentation in an area. So as you can guess, we got a lot of applications in the STEM subjects. But the institutions also had to highlight how this appointment would have significant impact within the institution, and not just in relation to gender equality. It was how will this person make your unit, department, school better. And then also how they could justify that this would be what we described as an accelerated and sustainable change within the institution. One of the ways that we ensured the legality of the process was to add extra funding to the higher education system. So we weren't taking an opportunity away from anyone who was already in the system. This was additional funding on top of the normal state funding for posts within the higher education sector. And I suppose one of the main criticisms, which actually came from senior females, was around that this would be seen as a handing out jobs to women professors, and it wouldn't have the same rigour as a normal professorial appointment process. So we've been very strict around that, and the same high standard for these posts applies to any other professorial post applies to these posts. Now I won't belabour this, given that we're running behind schedule, but these are some of the key questions that we asked the panel members. So we brought in international experts to review the applications. Now the other approach that we've taken is seed funding. So unfortunately there's been a lot of grand pronouncements in Ireland about gender equality, but we haven't seen the same flow of money. Now I would say that the previous initiative will probably cost about 60 million over 10 years. So the funding for those posts is in place for 10 years. So 60 million is quite a lot of money to put in the system. But it also means that we don't have a lot of money to actually fund capacity building and so on, because we've top-loaded it all into that particular initiative. Now the Gender Equality Enhancement Fund only comes to about €250,000 a year, although again with the size of the Irish system it can be a significant amount of money, and we usually fund a number of projects at about €50,000 a year. And the objectives of this fund are to encourage innovative approaches, to help institutions respond to the national recommendations, and then also to encourage cross-sectoral collaboration. So we require that at least 3 institutions collaborate on any application, and we try and ensure that the applications are, they have their own purpose, that they're scalable and so on, so that we can roll them out across the system. And we award the funding in different areas. So we have very little research on gender equality in Ireland. We rely on research that people are researching Athena Swan UK and so on, and they're not actually the same thing. So we're trying to get more research on that. Obviously we fund training programs and then Athena Swan capacity building initiatives. And these are just, I won't go through these, but these are just some of the examples of the type of thing that we've funded. We've seen quite a focus on mid-career development. You can see there were a couple of projects funded around that because it was seen as the pinch point. But other things like female role models in PSTEM, and one quite interesting one last year on the impact of menopause on the careers of women. Now, the last thing is this idea of indirect funding. So the HEA funds Athena Swan nationally in Ireland, so every publicly funded institution has access to apply to Athena Swan. And at the same time, every publicly funded higher education institution has to apply for Athena Swan. So in a way, we're funding them, but then we're making them do it. We did a survey last year, the year before, and it was recognised that the real key driver across Irish higher education institutions for gender equality wasn't the national policy recommendations, wasn't me knocking on the door asking for updates, but was rather the work that was going on to implement Athena Swan gender equality plans. And I suppose what the real kick has been this linking of whole of institution eligibility for public research funding. So we have three main research funders, the Health Research Board, Science Foundation Ireland and the Irish Research Council, and they've all agreed to implement this recommendation that we have. Now, how we've gone about that isn't quite as draconian as you have an award, you can apply for research funding, you don't have an award, you don't get it. We've implemented timelines, so different institutions, particularly different sizes of institutions, have different timelines, but we've done it in such a way to make it rigorous but also achievable. And I think that goes back to the point about aspiration and target, is that we wanted them to all aspire to silver. And the 2016 review wanted them to achieve silver within 7 years, which when we looked at it, decided it was bonkers. So we had to kind of come up with a way of ensuring that institutions weren't, I suppose, defaulting on their obligations around gender equality. We're also given a chance to achieve it, because what we found in the early days in Ireland was that a failed Athena Swan application was worse than not doing one at all in some cases, because it really demoralised organisations and schools and departments and so on. So the linking of the research funding has really been key. It has made presidents of institutions sit up and take note, and there's no institution that isn't committed to doing this. And on the flip side, what we have then is nationally, I don't have to monitor gender equality plans. I don't have to go into institutions and check up on their GEPs and see if they have them per the national recommendations, because now we know that every institution in Ireland has a gender equality plan. We know that that gender equality plan has been expertly analysed and assessed by an expert panel put together by Sarah and the guys at Advanced HE. So we have this quality assurance of the institutional GEPs without the need for us to monitor them as a regulator. And it's worked really, really well, I think. Now, we still have the issues, and Alison said it at the very start, the administrative burden and so on, which we need to get a hold of. But I mean, the end game is that we have 100% of our institutions have Athena Swan Awards, and it is making a difference. Anecdotally, we just need to figure out what the impact is. But Pavel is going to do some great research and tell us all how to do that, so that'll be fine. That's that. So if anyone has any questions, you can email me at that address, which has disappeared. Thanks.